Welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather. Today is Tuesday, June 19th, 2018. I'm your meteorologist, Kimberley Hoeppner, talking for you today. In just a moment, we'll be on to your marine aviation and public forecast. Remember, you can always get our information by dialing our 800 line at 1-800-472-0391 or visiting our website, weather.gov/Alaska, and clicking on the destination of your choice. And you could always give us feedback by writing our TV lead, Dave Snider, at david.snider@noaa.gov. We always appreciate your feedback. Now let's get on to the topics of the day. We're going to first look at the advisory. I just kind of hatched out the entire area here of the Susitna Valley. This is for the Yetna and Squetna rivers. That we're going to be seeing some additional rain showers propagate through the area, and for this we have some high levels across the area's streams and safety around those streams because we do have some debris flowing down those rivers and they are approaching moderate to minor bank full. And this is going to also mean that the smaller rivers around those areas are going to be experiencing some near flooding situations. So be sure, if you're recreating in that area, that you're careful around those rivers as those levels come up. Just thought I'd show you a picture here. Right behind me, we have this imagery here, courtesy of the state of Alaska, the DOT, and this is a shot of the high water levels from recent rainfall down at the Resurrection River at Exit Glacier Bridge out there. So be careful as we continue to see some additional rain showers causing some problems along area rivers. Now, when we talk about fire danger, this danger is very low. We have just a few high areas here continuing across the eastern areas of the state. Thunderstorm activity in the next few days is not going to help that situation. However, rainfall may keep some of those fires from starting or getting out of control. Now here's a current situation with the satellite picture. I'd like you to focus out here across the eastern Bering waters. Here's the Seward Peninsula and Kodiak. We'll see a stream of moisture riding up ahead of the center of low pressure that's across the eastern areas of the Bering. Now ahead of this system, we did see some breaks in the sky today, so let me lead on to the warm temperatures that occurred across the southeast today. With these breaks and the ridging that's sitting just to the south of the Dixon entrance, is allowing them to get up pretty warm this afternoon up into the 80s. So we have ridging off to the east with low pressure being the dominant pressure system across much of the state and helping to stream up the moisture all the way to the northern coast. Just off the map here, we do have another low pressure system that's sitting up in the Arctic, and that's helping to continue that stream. And now across the backside of this system, we have patchy fog with another ridge that's in the North Pacific. So the surface system is an occluded front with the center just south of Nunivak Island at 1,001 millibars this afternoon. So ahead of the system, we just have some shower activity with the upper level waves propagating around the upper level low. That's kind of a stacked system. It's not really moving anywhere. With the ridging out to the east, we're seeing a blocking pattern. So some patchy fog with a stable air mass here across the central areas of the Gulf of Alaska was occurring during the afternoon hours. That's kind of been persistent since yesterday. Now across the southeast, here's the breaks in the skies with temperatures reaching up into the 70s and 80s across those areas, especially along the inland locations of the Panhandle. And then across the eastern areas of the state, reaching temperatures in the upper 60s by this afternoon. A little bit cooler across the northern tier of the state with temperatures this afternoon, mainly in the mid-30s, Dead Horse near 35, but 36 degrees mostly across that north and northwest coast. Now across the southwestern tier of the state, mainly in a wet pattern, so a little bit cooler, but temperatures ranged between 39 degrees to 60 degrees by the time you got down to the Seward Peninsula this afternoon. So cooler temperatures just out across the Bering are just being pumped down around this cool core system. And then across the western areas of the of the Bering, we're seeing just that patchy fog continuing along a stable air mass associated with the high pressure. Now let's go over what's going to happen tonight. We did see a few strikes across just south of the eastern Brooks Range, and that's going to continue through the evening hours as an unstable air mass is just along the interior locations. And then we'll also see some snow possible just north of the Brooks Range as we have a weak boundary all the way back towards the Seward Peninsula, mainly rain showers just ahead of this boundary. We do have a steadier rain moving up through the southwest for the overnight hours as low pressure just continues to pump this moisture, and in combination with an upper level wave that'll be moving through later this evening. Now, the stable air mass to the west will cause that patchy fog to shove a little bit further to the east and possibly getting into the Pribilof Islands area. But mainly, patchy fog conditions are the main concerns through the Bering Strait and along the coastal areas of the north and northwest coast. Now, for the areas of the Gulf, mainly dry with ridging being the dominant weather pattern across there, patchy fog across the central areas of the Gulf, and the eastern areas with a little bit of that break in the clouds there keeping the activity of the fog at bay. However, we are going to see some low-level clouds probably moving back in during the overnight hours. Now let's move on to your Wednesday forecast, looking at isolated thunderstorms across most of the interior locations from essentially the western areas of the Alaska Range to the eastern areas of the Brooks Range. So expect that activity through the afternoon and late afternoon hours with the diurnal heating. Now for the southern tier of the state, that's going to be the most wet pattern with the most numerous showers across the southwest Bristol Bay and the Kuskokwim Valley and Delta locations, and also across the western areas of the Gulf of Alaska. A little bit of downsloping on the western Kenai will keep areas drier there, and then will just be mostly cloudy across much of the Gulf of Alaska with some breaks in the afternoon for the southeast. Now across the northern tier of the state, patchy fog conditions just along the coast with not much change in the forecast happening through your Wednesday. The ridging out to the west is going to continue to just traverse south of the western Aleutians there. Possibly some upper level waves making way around this low pressure system will bring some scattered or light isolated showers across the areas of the Bering as it swings these axes around the low pressure system. Now for the Gulf of Alaska, dry conditions persist. Most of the showers will be inland with the upper level waves moving ahead. Afternoon and evening thunderstorms and possible clearing for your Thursday afternoon again for the southeast. A little bit of clearing there with a ridge starting to shift a little bit further to the central, just south of the central waters of the Gulf. Now the boundary of this low pressure system, we're just going to see that thermal trough. That's going to be the main firing for tomorrow afternoon showers and thunderstorms. The southwest stays in this low pattern, so a little bit cooler around the low pressure system, and then we'll also see a little bit tighter gradient, so northerly flow along the backside of this low pressure is expected. Now patchy fog will continue across the north coast there, keeping things on the cooler side. Now let's talk about those temperatures in more detail. You can see Wednesday morning, the warmest areas of the state are going to be along the Alaska-Canada border with temperatures dropping down into the mid to lower 50s. Actually, the southeast will see those same trends in the low to mid 50s. And then elsewhere, we'll see temperatures in the mid 40s to upper 40s with some temperatures near 50 along the Kenai. Looking for temperatures mainly in the low to mid 40s across the southwest where the low pressure system is sitting just off the coast, keeping temperatures a little bit cooler across the Bering during the overnight hours in the lower 40s. Let's take a look at your Wednesday afternoon forecast. A fairly warm trend stretching all the way back towards the southwest may allow Bethel to get up to temperatures near 60. So general trends will be near 75 degrees across the interior locations. The coldest areas along the northern tier of the state back into the mid 30s for them. And then for the Gulf locations, looking at temperatures reaching to mid 50s to near 60 degrees. Out west, we're looking at temperatures in the mid 40s. The southeast, like I said, will be breaking out again, at least into the mid 70s, with some locations getting a little bit warmer, possibly into the 80s and peaking out during the afternoon hours, We'll see a few temperatures in the 60s just along the coast near Yakutat. Now for your Thursday morning conditions, very similar, warm temperatures across the interior in the 50s and across the southeast. The northern corridor back to just below freezing, and the west coast all in the mid-40s, as well as much of south central. The western areas of the state will mainly be in the lower 40s. Let's take a look at your afternoon temperatures for Thursday. Another repeat in temperatures, maybe slightly warmer towards the western side of the state. Temperatures slightly warmer across the north coast, and temperatures near steady across the Bering locations. Gulf locations will be in the upper 60s to near 70.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Tomorrow morning, flying weather is going to be looking best across the interior areas of the state, with IFR and MVFR conditions to the north and to the south. Across Prince William Sound to the Kenai, expect IFR conditions along the western range as well to Kodiak Island. Also for much of the eastern areas of the Gulf, and MVFR ceilings just creeping into some of the inner channels there. And now across the western areas of the state, we're seeing mainly across the southwest mainland the IFR and MVFR conditions, with IFR conditions stretched across most of the Bering and Aleutian chain area. IFR also for the Alaska Peninsula. Now for Wednesday afternoon, some improvement across the Alaska Peninsula, with better improvement across much of the interior there. Further north, IFR is going to be confined just to the north of the Brooks Range along the coastal locations. For the Gulf region, look for IFR conditions mainly across the eastern Gulf, with MVFR conditions across the inner channels. We'll see MVFR conditions along the west, with IFR conditions staying across the western Kenai and parts of the western Alaska Range. Looking at MVFR to IFR conditions widespread across the Aleutian chain, Alaska Peninsula, and much of the Bering. Now let's take a look at your flying weather for Thursday morning. Again, interior looking pretty good just along the coast. IFR conditions to the north. IFR and MVFR conditions overspread still across much of the Bering and for the eastern Gulf as well. We'll continue to see that MVFR conditions just along those inner channels, with IFR conditions for the Prince William Sound to start Thursday morning and across much of the Alaska Range, looking for conditions to be MVFR across much of the southwest mainland. For the afternoon time frame, conditions will persist pretty much in the same pattern. IFR to the north and to the west, and nudging into the west coast here for your Thursday afternoon, and IFR conditions hanging on to the eastern Gulf, MVFR conditions for those inner channels. Let's take a look at the passes in more depth. Anatuvik Pass for tomorrow will be MVFR, but improving to VFR during the afternoon hours. And we'll see Adigan Pass MVFR to VFR as well. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will stay MVFR all day. And we'll see rainy IFR conditions for tomorrow. And then Windy Pass will be MVFR to VFR for Wednesday. Isabel will go MVFR in the morning to VFR late day. And Mentasta will be VFR conditions all day, but looking for some possible isolated thunderstorms there to develop late afternoon or early evening. Now for Tanita, MVFR conditions, Portage, MVFR, IFR for the Portage side. Now we'll see the VFR conditions at Chilkoot and White Pass, so just north of those MVFR conditions across the inner channels. Now your freezing level heights here, surface is draped along the coast and then climbs 2,000 to 6,000 feet across the Brooks Range, and then widely just 6,000 to 8,000 feet across the interior locations in the southern tier of the state, and then height rises to 12,000 feet across the southeast. Across the western state, we're looking at 6,000, decreasing to 4,000 across the eastern Bering waters, and then slowly increasing towards the west. Let's take a look at your icing. Main concerns tomorrow is going to be along the north slope and then along the eastern areas of the Bering, and also including the Alaska Peninsula. Let's take a look at the systems that are kind of generating the weather in our area. Jet stream here at 30,000 feet is mainly a troughing position with a trough centered over the Alaska Peninsula. Not a lot of movement with this pattern, a blocking ridging pattern there just to the east and to the west, so we're kind of in that trough pattern, which is reflected at 9,000 feet. Here's the low pressure centered around the eastern waters, a little bit of a speed max ahead of this low pressure between 20 to 35 knots, with 15 to 30 knots out of the north on the backside of the system, lighter wind speeds across the ridging to the west. Now let's take a look at the ridging that's building in across the Alcan border here. We're looking at a southerly flow, 20 to 35 knots overall, with lighter wind speeds under the influence across the northern tier of the state. Between the ridging and the troughing, a little bit of variations, but mainly between 5 to 10 knots, so quite unaffected. And then for the south, looking at that light flow as well, let's go ahead and go on to your 3,000 foot level, and we're looking at that low pressure centered around the eastern Gulf, so southerly flow inland with the 20 to 25 knots mainly across the Gulf, increase here across the Kenai at 35 knots. Lighter speeds across the southeast, and to the west a little bit of a stronger northerly flow, so your turbulence are focused around the low pressure system.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
The Space Weather Prediction Center has had a long-standing relationship with the power industry, so they've been aware that solar storms, the geomagnetic storm piece of that, can affect the operation of their systems and induce extra currents and loads on those systems that can either trip those systems offline or in the worst of cases, cause damage. That relationship goes back for several decades. In fact, a big incident in 1989 where part of Quebec was tripped offline that affected something like 6 million customers for about 9 hours. I think that really raised the awareness in the power industries.
When we get the alert, we watch the grid and start looking for issues. Are we seeing a decline in voltage? Are we seeing equipment failures? And we readjust the system to try to mitigate those problems, try to keep the lights on and keep it from going out.
Averaging about 500, 550 kilometers per second.
If we didn't have this early warning, we wouldn't see it until our sensor saw it. Getting more information quicker and faster before the storm hits, not during the storm, is a big improvement.
In the long term, I think what we need and what we're moving toward, the U.S. as a whole, is better modeling, fully understanding this phenomenon, understanding how it would impact specific systems.
Rather than actually experiencing a storm, we can simulate storms in our software and see what the impact is. We try to get ahead of it. We always plan that if there's an outage, how can we keep the lights on? What's the best process to prevent it?
In the end, 5, 10 years from now, there's going to be a whole mix of operational procedures driven by what we do on prediction and warning. And then there also will probably be some level of hardware controls to ensure the reliability of the grid.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
There's different types of impacts on communication systems, and the HF we call the high frequency, which is that band of communications 3 to 30 megahertz. But it's a very important band of radio communication because it's used widespread. It's used, for example, by the airlines.
HF radio is most commonly used for position reporting when you're going across the ocean airspace, which is devoid of radar. And ATC can't see you, so it's up to you to report your position and your altitude and your speed.
HF works great most of the time, except during a big flare. And during a big flare, that HF communication capability could be gone within a minute or two. So as soon as we see something happening in there and we see a flare, it's one of the first things we do is alert the aviation community, hey, big flare, HF's going to be impacted.
Once we know that there's an event going on, then the aviation industry and the airlines can react to that. They can alter their routes over the poles. They can lower the altitudes that they're flying at, or maybe decide not to fly at all in the interest of the passenger safety.
So that's just one example of how HF is used, but the emergency response community will use it a lot too. It's one of their primary backups.
When you've lost connectivity between certain government agencies, it gives you that long-range coverage to talk from out-of-state to federal governments or from the FEMA locations to the state emergency operations centers.
So if you've got a big hurricane impact in the coastline, whatever big city, we've got the cell towers down and whatnot, we've got emergency communication folks in there. Those folks are very familiar with space weather and how it impacts their systems.
Here in recent years, it was used during Katrina when we had a lot of communications outages down there. It was also used during Hurricane Ike. There was an outage of the telephone circuits with the Texas State Emergency Office, so it was used in both of those situations.
So when we talk about backup, especially for the airlines, typically they'll have SATCOM, so it'll be satellite communication.
The satellite technology that emergency responders use could be GPSs, could be satellite phones, satellite data terminals.
Space weather events can impact SATCOMs. The impact can range from a nuisance to loss of a spacecraft. So we will give them the heads up. If we have space weather events, flares, whatnot, they need to know what's impacting their systems. Situational awareness is key. Time is of essence to these folks. Again, it's life and death.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hello, and now on to the marine portion of the show. Let's take a look at the ice edge. This was updated this afternoon. Primarily, we have the ice edge that's going to be with southerly winds moving across the ice edge. We might see some strips moving to the south with the northerly flow through the next few days. So basically, we're not planning to see that ice edge decrease over the next few days with those colder temperatures staying along the coast. Let's take a look at the southeast marine forecast now as we head into your Wednesday forecast. Looking at winds, a little bit of direction change here with southerly winds across the inner channels and more of a west to northwesterly flow across the outer waters. Seas across the inner waters will be 2 to 3 feet with those outer waters in the range of 7 feet. Now let's take a look at your Thursday forecast, and that's going to be a little bit more of a directional change, a northerly flow across the southern inner channels towards the Dixon entrance with more of a southerly flow up towards the northern Lynn Canal. Change of wind direction out across the outer waters in the south to southwest direction, all around 15 to 25 knots. A little bit of small craft up there towards the northern channels. Now let's take a look at the north and western areas of the Gulf. More of a northerly flow becoming southeasterly flow. A lot of directional changes here with the pressure systems situated the way they are. An offshore component across most of the Cook Inlet and for the Prince William Sound. However, all those speeds are 10 knots and under. Seas on this day are going to be 2 feet across the Cook Inlet and 5 feet across the areas of the western Gulf towards Amatui Island there. And then we'll see the northern Gulf around 6 feet as well. On your Thursday forecast, we will see more of a directional change again with a southwesterly flow across most of the Gulf water, southerly flow up across the inlet, all under 20 knots once again. So probably a nice day for the boating, except for the clouds and rain that's going to be across the western waters there. Let's take a look at the Alaska Peninsula, light wind speeds for this time of the year. We're seeing more of a south to southwesterly flow across much of the area, and that's going to be 10 knots and under with seas between 3 to 5 feet across Bristol Bay and the northern side of the Alaska Peninsula, and 6 to 7 feet south of Kodiak Island and south of the peninsula. Looking at your Wednesday forecast, primarily a southwesterly flow across the entire area with seas between 3 to 5 feet. Your Aleutian chain for Wednesday is going to be more of a west to northwesterly flow across the chain with seas between 4 to 6 feet. And the highest seas towards the eastern Aleutians. On Thursday, expect more of a zonal flow with westerly flow across the area around 15 knots, and seas will be the same on this day between 4 to 6 feet. Your west coast for Wednesday, we'll see more of a northerly flow across the west coast for all the locations between 15 and 20 knots. Seas will be 3 to 5 feet. And then we'll see on Thursday a similar pattern becoming a little bit more northwesterly and southerly just south of Nunivak Island there, all under 25 knots. So no small crafts for Thursday either. So for Wednesday across the north and west coast, all under 20 knots here. Out of the east to northeast direction, we'll see ice across most of the area where it's ice free. It's going to be 5 to 6 feet around that Chukchi Sea area. Now let's go into your Thursday forecast. A little bit lighter wind speeds, and don't forget the patchy fog. A little bit stronger winds on this day. Small crafts 25 to 30 knots with seas between 5 to 7 feet. Let's take a look and recap your forecast. Low pressure is going to continue across the eastern Bering waters. It's going to be pulling some moisture up through the entire state, bring some numerous rain activity, numerous showers across the southwest, isolated to scattered showers inland. Thermal trough will be the area for the thunderstorms to be firing off in the late afternoon and evening hours, and we'll see some snow possibly across north of the Brooks Range during the overnight hours, patchy fog across the western areas of the Bering and also across the central areas of the Gulf. We'll see some clouds creeping into the southeast during the overnight hours, and then they'll see that ridge influence again for tomorrow. Otherwise, shower activity and isolated thunderstorms across the interior continue through your Wednesday forecast. Across the north, a little bit drier with the low pressure centering near the Alaska Peninsula on Wednesday, and then that system lifts north, pulling some rain a little bit further to the north, so a little bit wetter on your Thursday across the central interior with some isolated thunderstorms, and drier and warmer conditions continue across the southeast. Thanks for staying with you. I'll be back with you again tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.